France secretly owns 14 countries. Let's take a look.
French treasury. The issue at stake is the apex of French policymaking, the CFA franc. Using it, France controls the monetary sovereignty of 14 nations, making up nearly 200 million.
Remember what I told you about how, you know, this is one of the leading economies of France?
People. These countries include Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, and the Central African Republic. And while these nations have a seat at the United Nations and wave their independent flags, it is only the face of...
I know the super secret 15th, but I'm not telling you. Dude, what the fuck? Tell us. What the fuck, dude? Yo! That's messed up, dude. That's messed up.
Imperialism that has changed. The conduct of business has largely remained the same. The big difference is that imperialism used to be spread through tanks. Nowadays, it comes through banks.
Well, that's just, you know, part and parcel for European neo-colonialism. 15th is Louisiana.
Special thanks to the sponsor of this video, War. The most comprehensive.
Shut the fuck up.
Anyone pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, premium account, boosters, and much more. Anyone can create money.
Now that's fucking targeting right there, dude. That right there, that's some hyper targeted shit.
The hard part is having others accept it. In pre-colonial times, many African societies used cowrie seashells as a medium of exchange. These seashells were so widely circulated that by 1800 they had an official exchange rate with the French currency. But as the French Empire colonized deeper into Africa, Paris sought to monopolize these circuits of production and trade. Taxes were demanded in francs, and armed troops were sent to markets, forcing merchants to accept French currency. From the 1930s onwards, France came to dominate the money supply in French-speaking Africa. With new power came new extrajudicial perks. Paris gained access to African labor and raw materials at sub-market prices, while finished goods were sold back to Africa at above-market prices. French neo-colonialism was so intrusive, so ruthless, so unique that it earned a name of its own, France-Afrique. Following World War II, however, things changed. Paris joined the Bretton Woods.
Another thing that's suspect is when French racists say they're against this practice, they will oftentimes give the game away, where they are not actually against the practice itself. They're just against the secondary consequence of that, which is immigration into France. They don't like when black people come into France as a consequence of this ongoing exploitation.
System, and as a result, the French franc was devalued to set a fixed exchange rate with the US dollar. These fiscal reforms were taking place at a time when Africa was decolonizing itself. A weaker currency only added fuel to the fire. So, to hold on to its African holdings, France conjured a new currency in 1945 called the CFA franc and forced its colonies to adopt it. Initially, the CFA franc was pegged to its French counterpart at a rate of 1.7 to 1, but in 1948 it was increased to 2 to 1. By overvaluing the CFA franc, Paris maintained its economic advantage while crushing Africa's export competitiveness. So in a way, France built its post-war recovery partially to a wealth transfer from Africa. Even so, the most effective forms of control are those that are invisible. Recognizing this in 1958, France hijacked authentic decolonization by installing local collaborators and
Macron calls Russia one of the last imperial colonial powers on Africa visit. France has assassinated 22 African presidents since 1963. Here's a list of African presidents who have been assassinated by France since 1963. Okay, I need to see this list. This list seems a little insane. I don't know if it's 22 seems like a bit of a 22 seems like a bit of an embellishment. It might be, but I think they're giving up a little bit to the CIA. Like they're kind of taking CIA credit a little bit. It seems. You know what I mean? What the fuck is what is this? Tajamo? I feel like if I look through this list, which we can take a look at afterwards, but I feel like if I look through this list, there's gonna be a lot of like CIA doing like heavy lifting, and then France taking credit for it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Just like when they talk about, when they get some of their some of the people that they offer dual citizenship to be French instead of an African nation of origin when they're winning World Cups. But of course, when they're not winning World Cups, then they're immigrants, and not welcome, that kind of thing.
Granting them statehood, these collaborators became the custodians of France's neo-colonial empire by maintaining the Franc zone and French military bases. Only Guinea turned down the offer. Its leader, Sékou declared that his people preferred being poor in freedom than rich in slavery. Guinea thus rejected the CFA franc, seeking to develop its own currency. France felt it needed to make an example of Guinea, so it cut pensions to war veterans, dismantled Guinea's power grid, and then attempted to block its UN membership. France went as far as to induce hyperinflation by flooding the country with counterfeit bills, all the while funding armed anti-government resistance. Yeah, it got pretty crazy.
America shit.
The plan ultimately failed to dislodge Sékou, but Guinea's economy never fully recovered. Likewise, when Togo had a change of heart and sought to ditch the CFA franc, France made another example, this time without loose ends. Togo's leader, Sylvanus Olympio, was assassinated in January 1963. French involvement is suspected, but official records remain conveniently closed. Of itself, further attempts to conceal French imperialism followed. The CFA franc was split into two currencies covering the Central and West African states. By the mid-1970s, their respective central banks were Africanized and moved to Yaoundé and Dakar. Though local Africans staffed these institutions, there were no fundamental policy changes, and France
stopped downplaying European neocolonialism. We literally came up with this shit. True. You are right. I'm just talking to an American audience for the most part. That's why I'm using that example. Does that make sense? Like I'm talking to a lot of Americans who understand this on American terms, which is why I'm explaining it by saying like they're doing America shit.
Retained veto power over
partially because like we kind of perfected it. You know what I mean?
Governing statutes. This included a requirement that member states deposit half their exchange reserves at the French treasury plus another 20% for financial liabilities, meaning member states retained access only to 30% of their money. Moreover, all foreign exchange conversions were to pass through the French treasury. The way this fiscal policy works is by operations accounts. These are special accounts held at the French treasury. The denominations are in euros, but when accounts are in credit, the African central banks effectively place their foreign exchange reserves at France's disposal. But when the central banks' accounts are in debit, they are obligated to pay interest to the French treasury. In other words, CFA...
They're so helpful, dude. I mean, the underpinning of this is like, obviously, like military action, continued oppression, but the continuation of such, debtor capitalist imperialism is basically saying like, oh, well, these African nations can't control their own currencies. I mean, we got to do it for them. You know what I mean? And of course, they're going to pay us a little bit of a price for us to be able to do such a thing.
Member states pay France to hold on to their money. Even more unsettling, no one knows what France does with the money. The French treasury does not disclose this information even to CFA franc nations. So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary if France were to reinvest African funding for French profit. However, one looks at it, the CFA scheme is an effective moneymaker for France, and French businesses benefit as much as the French treasury. More specifically, France doesn't need to draw on its foreign exchange reserves for African imports. Dozens of French multinationals are present in Africa, including Total Energies, Areva, and Vinci. Africa also grants France access to strategic resources like uranium, which is indispensable for France's nuclear energy sector, meeting 3/4 of French energy needs. Meanwhile, Gabon is a source of crude oil, Mauritania delivers iron ore, while Togo and Benin provide agricultural commodities. Additionally, the icing on the cake, French national Vincent Bolloré owns most of West Africa's major ports. It is thus not by incident that former French President Jacques Chirac once stated that much of the money in French banks comes precisely from exploiting Africa, and that France would lose its global standing without its African empire.
This is why people say Africa is not poor. Africa is not a poor continent. As a matter of fact, it's one of the richest continents. It's just that Africa has been stolen from the jump. That's it. It's literally... That's it. That's what it is. It's just been, they've had their natural resources extracted for a tidy profit that goes directly to European coffers. And by people, I don't know what, play that yellow clip. No, we don't need to do all of that, okay?
To preserve its hegemony, France has intervened militarily on the continent 40 times since the 1960s. From propping up corrupt dictators to conducting military operations in the Sahel. Moreover, the configurations of the CFA franc allow profits and capital to be repatriated with ease. Between 1970 and 2010, Ivory Coast lost $40 billion to capital flight, which could have reduced poverty by 10% annually had it been reinvested domestically. Meanwhile, Equatorial Guinea and Congo, the main oil producers, transferred out the money equivalent of 43% and 30% of their respective GDPs between 2000 and 2009. Similar trends are present in Gabon and Cameroon. Opulence at the top generates misery below. Though advocates point to the CFA franc's stability, a lack of monetary sovereignty restricts the tools available to the CFA member states. For instance, Ivory Coast's inflation rate is below 6% versus 29% in neighboring Ghana, but the latter's extreme poverty rate is only 13% versus 30% of Ivorians. The CFA members...
Bro, people are so mad about France in the chat, and it's so funny because like everyone that's saying this is American, like, what do you think we do? Like, well, what do you mean? Like, what? Like, why do you think I'm so angry all the fucking time as it pertains to U.S. foreign policy? Did you have Paris syndrome when you went to France? No, I like France. I think France is very pretty. I know that that's an unpopular opinion, but from what I understand, Paris syndrome happens to Japanese tourists for the most part who like fantasize about France. They are like big Francophiles in Japan, but then they realize like they're coming from a actually developed nation, like a real developed nation, and then they go to France and they're like, well, it's just like kind of shittier than what we have at home.
States also lag behind other African states growth-wise. Some are even going backwards. Ivory Coast's real GDP per capita is 1/3 lower than in 1978. In 2016, Senegal was at its 1960 level. Meanwhile, Cameroon, Congo, and Gabon have not topped their respective peaks of 1986, 1984, and 1976. This means these countries have had little to no real economic growth in decades. But change...
Japan is more developed than France. The people work 80-hour weeks and only get paid like 60 of those hours. My guy, come on. I mean, I wasn't talking about like labor rights at all, as a matter of fact. I was simply talking about like infrastructure. The reason why I find France to be fun and lovely is because I live in the United States of America, a nation without infrastructure and a nation that has higher hours of wage labor than France and Japan. Okay, so you're wrong on that front. We have worse labor conditions in the United States of America overall. our labor conditions are like, less than India, but still incredibly awful. And then also on top of that, we don't have any like decent infrastructure, no city planning, none of that. At least France has that. I see no issue with working more hours, to be honest. Okay, Dodgers lover, have fun with that. You know what I mean? Just like you're never working for yourself, you're working for another boss. So that's great. I mean, if you don't have issue with working additional hours, then, I guess it's all right then. Never mind. Yeah, just go back to work. My man loves the Dodgers and he loves the boot,
Is the only
Does he love the top of the hour ad break though? Which comes at the top of every hour? Or does he work extra hours so we can avoid the top of the hour ad break by subscribing for $5 or for free with the Twitch Prime by connecting your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account to get one free Prime subscription a month, or by maybe getting gifted a sub if he's lucky. If you're lucky, you can get gifted a sub and avoid the top of the hour ad break. That's right. Here's a 3-minute ad break now.
constant in life. In recent years, the societies of the CFA member states have started publicly talking about alternatives. It's a trend that is becoming increasingly louder. The most feasible proposal is to form a regional currency bloc untethered from French control. Some proponents of this plan would use the West African ECOWAS economic union as a springboard. This would reorient the CFA franc member states around Nigeria, which accounts for more than 2/3 of the regional GDP. Plus, Nigeria is a net oil exporter, while most West African states are importers, so there is a natural synergy in the ECOWAS region. Of course, nothing worth having comes easy. Paris has sought to forestall these attempts. A law to this effect was passed in the French Senate in January 2021. It looks to change the West African CFA franc into the ECO, and then abolish the operations.
892, thank you for that. Faustini says, every time Hassan talks about colonial imperialism, I want to remind him that the United States is also a colonial project that threw off its imperialist master. We inherited European imperialism. We didn't create it. Also, 4 out of 10. Okay, we inherited it and then perfected it. What the fuck does that mean? Prop 65 warning, thank you for the 5 get the subs. The Lost Companion, thank you for the 3 get the subs. It's just like that's so... Faustini just has to chime in and make it seem like it's not us that's doing this. Like, you got to distance American actions from America for some reason every single time.
Accounts and withdraw French personnel from the central banks. All this is to be completed by 2027, but Paris would still retain effective control. Where the African monetary reserves would be held, at which location remains unaddressed. It's safe to say that the French reform is nothing but a ruse. Ultimately, the best solution may be for the individual states to have their own central banks and currencies fixed to a common regional unit at an adjustable rate. This would give monetary sovereignty to 14 nations, or nearly 200 million people. But many still fear crossing swords with France, and for good reasons. So, any attempts to break away from French hegemony would require a joint effort across the CFA franc zone. Most of all, the African collaborating elites who benefit from the system would need to be sidelined and replaced by lawmakers prepared to embark on a path of self-directed development. This may prove to be the greatest stumbling block, and it's something that has to change from within, because there is nothing more agreeable in life than making peace with the status quo, and yet nothing more corrupting. I've been your host Shirvan from Casper Report.